Pick Computer Science video number 34, again looking at subprograms, but this time functions.
So what are functions then? These are very similar to procedures. They need identifiers like procedures do. They're called from the main program just like procedures, and they can use parameters just like procedures. The main difference is that functions will return a value to the main program, so the main program can use that value that the function comes up with. So let's look at an example. Simple form with one button on there. The button retrieves a value from the user first of all, which is somebody's name entered into an input box, and then we display something in a message box, and that something actually is the calling of a function, passing in the name that we got off the user. Our function is called sfix'. This was a common problem from when I worked in industry. If you entered a name such as O'Neill tried to enter that name into a database, it would throw up an error because of the apostrophe. So you'd fix the apostrophe by putting two apostrophes there. It's just how it worked. So the function is declared here, and things to notice: we're declaring a function instead of a sub, and it is using a parameter, and it's passing sname into the sstring parameter here. Sstring is then worked upon, and you don't need to know what this code does at the moment, or we'll look at how to do this sort of thing in a future video, but it does some string manipulation to basically add an extra apostrophe into the name. So as part of the selection process in here, it basically says the name of the function is set to something. So let's see how this works. If we just put a breakpoint on and run it, if we click on go, code stops there, F8 to start to break into it, enter a name. I'm going to just put O'Neill, just with one apostrophe in there, and say OK. So this is where the program calls the function basically and passes in O'Neill as the parameter. So F8, the code jumps down to here. We can see that O'Neill is passed in as the parameter, and then this code basically loops around checking every character. So we've only got as far as the O really at the moment. So what I'm going to do is just put a breakpoint on end function and F5 so it's jumped all the way down there. But basically that code will return the value of O'Neill, but with two apostrophes in there. So we've come to the end of the function. If we F8 again, it's going to take us back up to where the message box is going to fire, and then because it's returned the value into this bit here, we will see the result in the message box, and there is O'Neill with two apostrophes. So function's done a good job for us there. So let's just define function. Similar to a procedure, defined with an identifier, contains instructions to be executed, may have parameters. Is called from the main program using the function identifier. When called, the main program pauses whilst control is passed to the function. When the function finishes, control returns to the main program. But here's the major difference, is that a function returns a value to the main program, so the main program can use the value, like we did in our message box. So here's a procedure called identifier1, calling the function identifier2, and passing in a parameter. Here's the function called identifier2. It does its job, but it returns a value back to the procedure. So that's how functions work. Just want to talk quickly about something called built-in functions. Most programming languages and IDEs, integrated development environments, will have built-in functions, and they are, again, pieces of code that will do jobs for us and return a value, but they tend to be pieces of code within the IDE that we don't actually see. We call them, but we don't see the code because they're built-in functions to the IDE and they're used by programmers all over the world. So here are some examples. The format function might format text into a particular format for us. The RND function might return a random number, and as with any functions, you pass in parameters. So on the RND function, you probably pass in a start number and an end number, and it will return a random number between the start and the end number. These three here are string manipulation built-in functions, and we've seen the mid $ one earlier on in the video. It helps to chop up text and return pieces of text from a longer string. The lcase function will put text into lowercase. The ucase function will put text into uppercase. We're going to have a quick look at the isNumeric function. So I've got a little application here that has one text box and a button, and the code behind the button uses the isNumeric built-in function to check the text entered into the box to see if it is numeric or not. But like I say, we can't actually see the code that does that check because it is built in. So if I run that, if I put in 8 and run the check, it says great, you entered a number. But if I put in the word 8, as in I ate apple, it says boo, you didn't enter a number. So that's the use of a built-in function.
So for the exam, key things to remember about subprograms we talked about in our last video when we looked at procedures, but it's worth going over them again because these are absolutely key things that you'd need to know in order to define the term subprogram. As we saw earlier, functions are very similar to procedures, but do have a very important, if subtle, difference. Key things to know about functions. Like a procedure, a function is a subprogram that is given an identifier or name in order to perform a task, but where a function differs from a procedure is that it will return a value. A function can be called from a parent program, usually as a variable. It can have 0 or more parameters fed into it, but of course it returns a value to the parent program when complete, and the result can then be used like any other variable. From the exam board pseudocode guide, there we've got an example of a function being written and being called, so it's worth familiarizing yourself with that. Further reading may well come in the form of doing some research on the web, such as on this Wikibooks website, into one or some of the many built-in functions that you'll find in languages like VB.NET. These are extremely useful, and we'll use more of these in the future. Hope you enjoyed that, found it useful. See you next time.